Hello everyone and welcome back to another review here on the TBR Media YouTube channel. My name is Jared and today we're going to be reviewing Miller's Girl. This is the feature directorial debut from Jade Halle Bartlett. It stars Jenna Ortega and Martin Freeman, and it's about a creative writing assignment that is given from an English instructor to his student that yields complex results between the two of them. This is a very, very interesting movie. I don't entirely think that the concept of it all quite blends itself to something that feels cohesive and of substance on screen. Nonetheless, let's talk about some of the more interesting elements of this film. And I think that comes down to, as the film would describe itself, kind of this romantic horror landscape. This is a movie that has a very Southern Gothic style to it. It takes place in Tennessee. And, it has this kind of literary aspect of the film where we get this narration from Jenna Ortega's character, Cario Sweet. The film's kind of an exploration of a broader dynamic of power. Who comes out on top, who holds the power, and who harnesses the power for their own benefit. This exploration of sinister intent. Ultimately, you get this really unique contrast of two different perspectives. Of course, Martin Freeman's character, Jonathan Miller, he has this weary, English teacher vibe to him, a failed writer in some aspects, and you get baggage with his character that I really did like, through his performance and also the script. And from Jenna Ortega, you get this moody, atmospheric, and even brooding sometimes, ambivalent naivety in some aspects, where she is 18, she reads a lot, she has this whole sprawling estate up in the hills of Tennessee that her parents have left to her essentially as they travel abroad. And so all she does with her time is read. Of course, that means reading some of the great literary works from a lot of different writers, but also the works of Jonathan Miller himself. And the two kind of are in this uniquely entertaining situation where the power dynamics are constantly shifting back from one another. And intention matters a lot in this movie. And I think ultimately intention is kind of the key driving point of the narrative. This tightrope walk between what's acceptable and unacceptable. And both of them have moments where they're kind of examining the situation that they're in this kind of pseudo toxic relationship almost, but not quite that. They're just more intrigued by one another. And I think that by the time the movie wraps up, that contrast between the two characters are what makes this film kind of feel, incohesive. As I mentioned, Jenna Ortega kind of brings this more moody atmosphere to the film. She's walking to school through the forest and mist kind of, surrounds the field where Mr. Miller ultimately is smoking benchside every day. He watches her as she walks from the forest over to him. That tonal difference between what we get, the more old school classic music vibe from Mr. Miller and the scenes that he's in, to the more droning elements of the sound design and the soundtrack that we get following Jenna Ortega's character. It's an interesting mashup that doesn't quite come together that well. So our two leads here are great, undoubtedly, but I was really surprised by Gideon Adlin, who is Cario Sweet's best friend in the movie Winnie. This is someone who is around basically Cario the whole time as she's trying to determine whether or not she's vying for Mr. Miller's attention and love and affection, or whether she needs to just stay true to, doing her college essays, reading and staying, and keeping herself very intact academically. And Winnie kind of pushes her to be a little bit more eccentric. Ultimately, that push from Winnie is what catapults Cario into this world of toxic malintent, for lack of a better word. And yeah, as this movie has a lot to do with talking, at least anyway, about the creative process and about literary works and writing, it tries to be a little bit more heady than it truly is. And I think that's where totally it maybe doesn't work, along with the differences in sound design around the two characters and around the tone that is clashing consistently with these two. And the writing here is just a little too pretentious for what this movie should have been, which is ultimately just trashy camp fun. But that's not to say that there aren't really good elements of it. Like I said earlier on in the review, I really did like kind of the Southern Gothic horror vibe that we got here, because I also think that this movie can be really funny at times. There's a few different scenes that made me chuckle a little bit, and infusing that kind of tone into more of the romantic comedy genre as a whole is a really interesting concept. I think that Bartlett did an exceptional job navigating the cinematography here by Daniel Brothers. It just didn't land the way that it should have, and I think half of that is it was trying to be a little bit more pretentious than it really was, and if it had just turned up the camp a little bit more and kind of blended the two tones between the two characters a little bit better, I think we would have been left with a much, much stronger film and a much stronger directorial debut from Jade Haley Bartlett. Nonetheless, Miller's Girl is out in theaters right now, so if you want to go see it, you certainly can, and let me know what you think of the film down in the comments below.